Changing gears a little bit here. We've been talking about on-grid primarily. Let's have a chat about off-grid. So what do we lose when we go off the grid? Well, the grid provides effectively infinite kilowatt hours to the customer. So we obviously need to supply all of their energy requirements, but the grid also provides massive instantaneous power. So we do need to look not only at just the kilowatt hours, but also what their peak demands are. And if you've sat through any Energex or Ergon presentations, you'll appreciate how important utilities consider peak demand. So some of the standard components you can expect to find in a typical off-grid system, something to manage the solar, something to manage the batteries themselves, somewhere to put the batteries. Batteries generally are not IP-rated devices, so they've got to go somewhere out of the weather. Backup generator, some way to start the backup generator. Remote monitoring, this is, I think, very important and a huge time saver potentially. Some of these off-grid systems obviously are a long way out, hours and hours, hundreds of kilometres. And in this day and age of the internet, if that customer has a problem and you're able to actually dial into their system and take a look and do some troubleshooting, you might be able to identify they've just blown a fuse and send them a new one in the post, and you didn't have to get out of your chair. So if you're doing off-grid and you're serious about it, definitely put in the remote comms. Here's an example of a system using Schneider components. You can see that unlike a standard PV system, which just has panels and an inverter, that there's a bit going on here. A couple of concepts that come up in off-grid, or just batteries generally. Depth of discharge, that diagram there showing that the battery at 100% is completely charged. If we were to discharge 25% and then charge it back up to 100%, that's called 25% depth of discharge. Going down to half and back up to full, 50%, etc., etc. C1, C10, C100 numbers. Think of this as being analogous to fuel economy in a car. When you buy a car, it'll give you both in the city and on the highway fuel economy number. What that means is if you have a full tank of fuel and you just do city driving, you can expect to go a certain number of kilometres. If you have a full tank of fuel and you do highway driving, you can expect to go further because highway driving is considered to be more efficient. Well, in the terms of extracting energy from a battery, doing it more slowly over a longer period of time, you can think of as being more efficient. So C100 means discharging the battery over 100 hours. Now, that may not be realistic in day-to-day use, but C100 is a number you'll find commonly on battery data sheets. So it's important to understand what that is. C10, I think, is a better number to be basing your calculations on, but the amount of energy you can expect to get out of a battery in 10 hours is less than what you can expect to get out in 100 hours. And then C1 is something that was never really around in the days before lithium batteries, but we do see it popping up now with lithium batteries. Voltage and amp hours, very simply put, it's a multiplication to give watt hours or kilowatt hours. Keep in mind that this is gross capacity before we start taking into account our depth of discharge. And cyclic life is simply how many cycles those batteries are expected to live for. And generally, cyclic life is until the battery can hold only 80% of its original capacity. This is certainly a number that 80% is something that should be familiar with people, because with solar panels, we have something very similar. We've got performance warranties around having the panels produce at least 80% after 25 years. Here's just a quick example. You can see if you have 48-volt battery and you discharge it over 100 hours, you're going to get a certain number of usable kilowatt hours. If you discharge at 50%, you discharge it more, then you will get more energy out of it, but the cyclic life reduces because you're working the battery harder. Battery inverters, just a quick comment, versus solar inverters, generally 2 AC outputs, not 1. You have to make sure your battery voltage matches up with whatever battery you're planning to use. IP rating, usually not IP65. So keep in mind that you're going to have to find somewhere out of the weather for this thing. and hugely configurable, hundreds of parameters oftentimes, and also impacted by temperature. This is key because a lot of these off-grid systems obviously are out in hot environments. So, for example, what it can deliver at 25 degrees Celsius is actually not as high as what, well, it's higher rather, than what a battery inverter will be able to deliver at 40 degrees Celsius. Just another one that comes up in off-grid systems that we don't usually see in grid-connected solar systems is MPPT charge controllers for DC coupling. Just means that we can basically take the DC straight off the panels, convert it down typically to 48 volts, and charge the batteries directly. So what do you need to know? Certainly how many kilowatt hours you're planning to use, and how many kilowatt hours you might need in the maximum case, but also what the peak demand might be. The solar resource available is largely dependent on where in the country we're talking, and days of autonomy is how long the batteries can support the load without solar input. Customer budget, well, that's a pretty important one. Some people are serious and they understand that a good system, an appropriate system, will be expensive. Other people, have this notion of going off grid, but when push comes to shove, they don't have the dollars. Now you'll see that we have given you each a copy of a questionnaire for off-grid systems. Basically, if you have anybody who's interested that you want to talk to about off-grid, fill that in and send it to us, and we can assist you with the design process. Just a couple of extracts from that form, and we will also provide you with copies of this form in PDF. Just details of the site, including that very important question down the bottom, forklift available. So batteries are heavy. Moving them around is a very important consideration. What the loads look like daily, summer, winter, perhaps there's a difference there. Air conditioning, for example. What your maximum load and nominal loads are. And then if you've got some thoughts on, exactly how the system should be put together, let us know, especially layouts of modules, et cetera, et cetera. All of that can go into helping to put together a proposal.